Hello there and welcome. I'm Markus Karlsson. Nigeria seems to be on course to become Africa's biggest economy. With an average annual growth rate of around 6 or 7% over the past decade, it looks set to overtake South Africa. Today I'm speaking to the woman who's in charge of this rising economic power. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala is the finance minister of Nigeria. She's in Paris for a summit of African leaders hosted by the French president. It's also bringing together African and French business leaders. Minister Iweala, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us and welcome.
Thank you, Marcus.
Now, I spoke there about an annual growth rate of around about 6% in the past decades or so. There are concerns that the Nigerian growth rate could come down if there are adverse shocks. What do you say about that risk?
Well, actually, it's somewhat better than 6% in the past decade, edging towards 7%. And yes, there are risks. It's a very robust growth rate built on the back of good macroeconomic management and stability and emerging sources of growth in the non-oil sector. And of course, there are risks. We are still quite dependent on oil for 70% of our revenues. So should the oil price come down too much, we are vulnerable, but we have made provisions to manage that because we have an account which we call the excess crude account, where we try to save during times of good oil prices, and that helps us to cushion in times of shock. So we are planning that next year. We spent down some of the money in that account in 2013, but we'll be building it back up as a cushion.
There are some critics, though, of the Nigerian economy. When I spoke to the head of the Nigerian Central Bank just a few months ago, he spoke, for instance, about a comatose industry and also about a bloated government. What do you say of his criticism and of that criticism that still exists?
Well, I love my central bank governor dearly, and of course, he says some of these remarks. It's true that our recurrent expenditure is very high, and we would like it to go down. It's almost 75% of total costs. That's too high. So we agree with that. And we have been working hard to bring it on a downward trajectory. But recent awards of wage increases, to public servants in 2010 really bloated the budget. And so we are looking for areas to streamline, make economies. We are also instituting something very interesting, which is a biometric method for paying our wages, which is designed to weed out what we call ghost workers from the workforce. Sometimes there are people inserted who are not really there. And we've been doing this exercise for over a year. We've been able to save a considerable amount of over 100 billion naira and weed out about 45,000 ghost workers. So we want to finish that exercise. That will help us slim down our roles. We also need to streamline and merge some agencies. It's not easy because they are underpinned by law, and you can see politically it's quite charged.
You spoke about the oil sector before, and still today, Nigerian exports are completely dependent on the oil sector. How do you counter that? How do you diversify the Nigerian economy? What's your plan?
Well, then you must follow what is happening recently. And I really do want to counter the governor's charge about comatose industry. This is completely changing. The president of Nigeria, President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, really launched what we call a transformation agenda. What does that mean? It means the true effort to diversify the country away from oil. The only way we see to really solve the fundamental problems of the Nigerian economy is to diversify away from oil, because we need to create jobs. Even though we are growing at better than 6%, as you noted, and IMF has projected 7.4% next year, the point is we are not creating enough jobs. So we need non-oil growth. And what is driving the economy right now is non-oil growth. The growth in the economy is coming from agriculture. It's coming from manufacturing. Manufacturing is no longer comatose, but is beginning to take off. We've got investments in different sectors in petrochemicals. We've just had a very big investment by Indorama of 1.2 billion in plastics and in fertilizer. We've got Nissan is looking at investing in the automobile industry. We've got Dangote, a rich businessman who is investing not only in cement, but is also going into oil refineries and others. We've got Procter & Gamble that has just built a factory for $250 million in the west of the country. So we have real investments coming in. Unilever, everybody is looking into investing in the country. But agriculture, as I said, the housing sector is about to be kicked off. Manufacturing is coming in. And we've got other non-oil minerals within the country that are really helping us as sources of growth. And don't forget, we have the creative industries, services. Nigeria has the second largest movie industry in the world after Bollywood. Yes, and it's created 200,000 direct jobs, 1 million indirect jobs, $250 million in value and counting.
You mentioned there are a few companies that have been investing in Nigeria and who are investing in Nigeria. Do you think, though, that Western companies have been too slow to catch on to the growth that is taking place now in Nigeria and elsewhere in Africa, for instance, because there has been so much focus on Chinese investments in Africa in the past, let's say, a decade?
Well, let me say this, that when you look at what is happening in Africa, I think there are two interesting phenomena you really need to look at. One is that much of our investment now is South-South. It's coming from China, India, Brazil, and it's coming from other African countries. South Africa is a major investor in Nigeria, for instance. And this is a phenomenon that is happening all over the continent and in developing countries as a whole. South-South investment is big. There's one other interesting piece of information, that is Africa-to-Africa investment is increasing. So Nigeria is investing in so many African countries. Our banks are in over 15 countries. Cementing plants being built by Dangote in more than 12, 13 countries. So we're also investing in each other. Now, what I say is, of course, North-South or South-North investment is very important. So we value it. But the point is that they may be, a little bit slow. I say to countries and investors from the North that they really have to work quite hard now, in order to be able to catch the opportunities that are coming.
Do you think Western companies, European companies, for instance, are taking African markets for granted?
Well, it would be presumptuous of me to say that. I don't know if they're taking it for granted, but I do know that if they don't scramble for the opportunities that are emerging now, they'll be left behind.
And who's going to take over if they are indeed left behind?
Countries from the South. Countries from the South. We have countries coming every day. Indonesia is making investments. It's not just the BRICS, but also non-BRIC countries are coming in and making and our own domestic investors are also seizing the opportunities, which is really what you want to see. First and foremost, investors need to see your own domestic investors putting in money in the country, and that's happening big time in Nigeria. We've got a company called Innoson manufacturing cars now. Almost more than 50% of the parts built in Nigeria. That's amazing to me.
Let me just ask you, though, about the business climate in Nigeria. You used to work for the World Bank. The World Bank comes out with its annual Doing Business report. In that Doing Business report, Nigeria is in spot 147 out of 189 countries. Doesn't that scare off potential investors?
Not really. I think if you look at many of the BRICS, their positions are also not that great. Some of them are 100, some of them are 88, some of them, they are not at the top. That doesn't mean that we don't need to do better. Of course, we'd like to do better, but we need to look at those particular areas, how we are being scored, and focus on them. It is true that we have a lot of bureaucratic hurdles. So I'm not saying that we are in the position we want to be. We are pledged to work very hard, point by point. I think what we're doing now is we have a competition council that has been set up. Our Minister of Trade, Industry and Investment is taking this on, and we're going to take these points one by one. But what we're seeing is that it's not really scaring off investors. Nigeria is the largest destination for investment in Africa.
So do you think that investors, they're looking more at the growth rate than the other factors, so to speak?
Yeah, they probably are, but that does not make us complacent. I think the question we ask ourselves, yes, we are the largest destination for investment, but maybe we could get more if we solved some of those problems. So I'm not here to say that, look, we feel very glad that we are not where we want to be. And we have to work really hard as a country. We are not complacent at all. And let me say this, that growth is not everything. You know, we are growing, but we're not creating enough jobs. And we have young people coming on the market. So we worry every time about whether the type of growth we have is the type we need to have. That's why we are happy that the non-oil sectors, this attempt that the president is pushing to diversify is beginning to work now. This past 12 months, we created 1.6 million jobs. We need about 2 million. So we are not there yet.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, it's been a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for being here at France 24. And with that, we're going to wrap up this edition of The Business Interview. Thanks for watching.